Hey everyone, it's Kenji. I'm going to be making some eggplant parmesan. So I'm making it the simplest way possible, so that, the pretty classic way, and even, the simplest version of the classic that you could possibly do. So this is not the American version where you have sort of the breaded eggplant slices that are, layered and baked, and is sort of really heavy, almost like a lasagna. This is more the classic version, which is sort of naked eggplant slices. There are versions that have a little bit of maybe flour, or some versions that even have a, egg on them. Or maybe a very light crumb coating, but this one, the simplest version, is just eggplant sauteed in olive oil, layered with a fresh tomato sauce. So there are versions that have cooked tomato sauces. These are tomatoes that I got just straight from the farmer's market, cooked just until they broke down and then passed through food mill. I made a video on that. You can find it down below. So this is very fresh tomatoes, no other flavors really. Some fresh basil, straight from the garden. You can get yours at the supermarket or the farmer's market or whatever, but of course fresh basil from the garden is the best. And then some fresh mozzarella cheese, some Parmesan cheese, olive oil, salt, and those are really the only ingredients. So we're going to start by treating the eggplant. Sometimes if I'm in the mood to, I will just sort of slice and fry the eggplant straight away, without purging it, without salting it and doing those things. That said, salting it and letting the salt do a bit of the work, that is in pulling out moisture from the eggplant and sort of collapsing the cells. Letting the salt do the work it makes the frying significantly easier for you, and it's largely hands-off time. So we're going to salt these eggplant slices and then let them sit for about 30 minutes so that excess moisture comes out. You can see I'm cutting these lengthwise with a knife. You can do them this way if you want. You can, if you find cutting them lengthwise to be sort of too precarious, you can also, cut them kind of at a bias like this, and if you don't want to do that, you can also just cut them straight across. It doesn't really matter too much. You do want to get them relatively uniform, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And as for the thickness of them, I'm going relatively thin here. But if you want to go, so the trade-off is that cutting them thinner, obviously means you have to fry more batches of them, because you get more pieces out of it. So cutting them thinner means that you have to fry more, so it takes a little bit longer. But I think that in the end you get a little bit better flavor because there's going to be more sort of browned bits in the in the baked finished thing. That said, thicker slices gives you a really nice, delicious, creamy, sort of more rustic eggplant parmesan, and that is totally fine too. So do it whichever way you want, and whichever way you have time for, let's say, time and patience for. So I'm going to lay out my eggplant slices like this, just to make salting them a little easier. This is one of the times it's nice to have a nice big board like this, even when I crowd it. I'm going to salt pretty generously, but not crazy, because you have to remember most of this salt's, not all of it, because some of it will come out in the liquid when we drain it off, but most of this salt is going to end up in the finished dish. So you want to put an amount of salt that is on par with what you would season your food to normally when you're eating it. Say if you're going to season like a piece of chicken that was about the size of this eggplant, season it about that aggressively. Okay, so now I've got a salad spinner here. Now I'm going to kind of just shingle these eggplant slices like this, okay, and just kind of lay them around. Doesn't have to be perfect, but basically I'm just trying to promote as much sort of drainage as possible, and then at the end I'm going to kind of spin this around the spinner and try and use the magic of physics to extract that excess moisture. At least as much as possible. And then, because I used to do that thing where you blot everything with paper towels, and we might end up doing a little bit of blotting at the end, but I always found it so tedious and also very wasteful just to blot so much eggplant. So I do it this way. Sometimes another method you could use, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to spin it. Yeah, we're gonna let that sit aside. Another method you can use, which is really great, I don't know why I didn't do it today, because I typically do it, is to brine the eggplants instead of salting them. So you just make a saltwater solution, pretty salty one, so like 2 to 3% salt by weight for the water. And then you put your eggplant slices in there, and you might think that because you're putting them in water, they're actually going to absorb water, but in fact, the opposite happens because of the salt. The osmotic force flows the opposite direction over the membrane of the eggplant, over the sliced parts of the eggplant, and so water actually gets pulled out of the eggplant into the brine, and so your eggplant collapses a little bit, and it ends up losing weight in that brine. And so then at the end, you just put it in a salad spinner and spin it dry, or you can sort of wring it out. But anyway, I'm going to let this sit for half an hour, so I will see you then. I'll be back in half an hour or so. All right, so this eggplant, you can see it has broken down quite a bit. So when you squeeze it, well, you can see all the moisture on there, but when you squeeze it, you should see it kind of compresses pretty easily and doesn't bounce back, whereas raw eggplant kind of bounces back. And so you see that cell structure is basically broken down because the water has been sucked out of it. So I'm going to give this just a little punch down. You can be as rough as you want with it, really. It doesn't matter if you kind of beat up the eggplant, because it is going to break down as it cooks. It gets cooked twice, it gets fried, and then it gets baked, layered with sauce. All right, so we got our eggplant beaten down like that. Just gonna spin it around a bit to get a little bit of excess moisture. Into here. Now I'm going to come over to my frying station. So I've got here, this is extra virgin olive oil I'm using. It doesn't have to be your best extra. I'm using the the Costco extra virgin olive oil, which is good stuff. It's fine. It's not the best extra virgin olive oil I have, but for this thing you don't really need it. You just want something that's going to give that eggplant that olive oil flavor. If extra virgin olive oil is too expensive for you, that's also fine. You can use any kind of oil you want at this stage, and what you can do at the end is later drizzle it with a little bit of extra virgin for that flavor. But that said, if you have access to relatively inexpensive extra virgin for frying, that's what I would use here. I don't want to see how hot this is. It could be a little bit hotter. We want like a relatively steady sizzle. I think by the time I move my camera over here, we'll probably be ready to go. So the oil temperature, I would say we want about 350 degrees. So you can see I'm doing this in my largest cast iron skillet here. I'm doing that just because it makes the frying process a little faster. If you don't have a cast iron skillet this large, obviously, don't do it in a cast iron skillet this large. Do it in whatever the largest vessel you have is. It'll work in a Dutch oven, it'll work in a saute pan, it'll work in a skillet, cast iron, non-stick, stainless, whatever you got, it doesn't matter too much. You're looking for about, a quarter to a half inch of oil. You can get away with less oil if you want, but as you'll see, eggplant, while it's in the pan, it absorbs quite a bit of oil. And I have a little trick for sort of getting off some of that excess oil that doesn't require sort of hopefully wasting too many paper towels. But it does absorb quite a bit of oil. So if you only have like the thinnest sheen of oil on the bottom of the pan, the eggplant will suck it right up, and then you won't really get a good, nice, even fry. So this dish, it is vegetarian. It is very few ingredients, but I wouldn't call it exactly the lightest dish because, the eggplant does absorb quite a bit of olive oil here. But it's the good kind of fat, right? All right, so you can see I'm going to try and lay these other slices of eggplant here out in a sort of even bed. And normally what I would do, typically what I used to do is I would fry these eggplant slices, transfer them over to some paper towels, let them blot a little bit, fry the next eggplant slices, more paper towels. What I do these days is I will take these eggplant slices, once they're fried, I'm going to place them on top of these, blot them down a little bit. So these eggplant slices will blot the excess oil out of these, and then when they go back in the oil goes back with them. So you save yourself a little bit of oil that way, and also save yourself some paper towel use. So win-win all around. So we're looking for these to get sort of a really nice golden color. It's going to take a few minutes, and what I can do is I can speed up this footage. All right, so we're going to speed it up. Right. Okay, so you can see I just flipped them over once. I flip them over before the top side is quite the color that I want it to be. So, you know, this is pretty brown here, but I'm going to let it get a little bit browner. But I flip it over before this top side is quite as brown as I want it to be, knowing that even as the second side cooks, the top side is going to continue to brown a little bit more. And then if it doesn't quite get there by the time the second side is brown, we can flip it over one more time. So eggplant, you know, you can flip it over back and forth as many times as you want until you get really sort of nail that perfect color on both sides. All right, so we'll keep speeding it up now, all right? All right, so these slices here are about the place I want them. Nice and brown, both sides. So I'm just gonna place them right on top of these other slices of eggplant here. Let them drain there for a second. We are gonna, I'm thinking of building it inside this little cast iron skillet here, this square guy. So I'm gonna first start with a little layer of tomato sauce. By the way, I'm not worried about tomato sauce, you know, stripping the seasoning on this cast iron skillet. I've done this in here many times, and as long as your seasoning is really good, it's no problem sort of baking with tomato sauce or even cooking with tomato sauce in there. You know, this cast iron pan's a Griswold. I think it's probably, you know, I'm sure someone can tell me, but I think it's at least 100 years old. And I think, you know, whatever I'm going to do to it now is not going to hurt it, huh? Which I guess is the same argument that people use about global warming. All right, I'm going to take now these fresh eggplant slices into the oil. They go. We're a little bit hot now, but that's okay. The eggplant slices will cool that right down. Like so. All right, so over here we got our eggplant. A little more tomato on each slice. And we can shingle them a little, that's all right. Now I got fresh mozzarella. I'm using fresh mozzarella here. You know, for more sort of classic American, you know, Italian American style eggplant parm, you would use, you know, shredded, like a aged mozzarella. Parts, you know, dry mozzarella, the stuff that you would put on, you know, pizza cheese, is what I would call it. You can use that here also if that's what you have or that's what you want. You could also use something like a combination of mozzarella and like a smoked provolone, or a little bit of a smoked mozzarella as well. But today I'm keeping it as simple as possible. Some Parmesan. Bunch of fresh basil. All right, and that's it. That's going to be what each layer of this thing is. So I will now speed up the rest of it also, and you'll see me when I stick this in the oven. All right, so here we go. Fast. Sorry, I should have mentioned earlier that, you know, when you're getting eggplants, you know, everyone will give you the same advice, which is that you should look for eggplants that kind of feel heavy for their size. So if you pick up a bunch of eggplants and a couple of them feel heavier than the other ones, go for the heavy ones, because those are going to have sort of a denser flesh and therefore more flavor. You know, modern eggplants, most of them are not very bitter, so you don't really have to worry too much about that, or too seedy, so I never really worry about that. But for this dish, I do like using the sort of smaller Italian eggplants as opposed to the really large American globe eggplants, just because I find it sort of more manageable to both slice them and fry them and arrange them. With the big slices can get of the larger globe eggplants can get a little unwieldy. But something, yeah, an Italian eggplant or a Japanese eggplant would be great here. Even a Chinese eggplant could work here. But anyhow, that's my eggplant tips. All right, I'm almost done here. We'll speed up the end again, and I will then catch you again when I'm going in the oven. So. All right, so we're pulling this last batch out. This one I am just going to blot straight on this paper towels, just so we don't have too much excess oil in there. Although again, like, Some amount of oil is good. By the way, if you are the kind of person who's bothered by the texture of eggplant skins, which some people are, I actually kind of like the textural contrast you get in there, especially because they get a little bit crispy when you fry them like this. But you can always peel your eggplants before you fry them or before you slice them. If you'd like, you can just use a regular old vegetable peeler and that works just fine. All right, so we're gonna, this olive oil, by the way, you can use it to fry other things, so save it, you know, fry your chicken cutlets in it, fry eggs in it, fry artichokes in it, fry other vegetables. Strain it, save it, it'll be fine for frying. Gonna get my last layer in here. And you'll see when we're assembling this, it's gonna look kind of watery. And in fact, even when it comes out of the oven, you're gonna see it, and it's going to look sort of almost frighteningly watery. If it is, you know, if this time it happens like the same way that it does pretty much every other time I've made it, which, you know, whenever it's on camera, it doesn't. But anyhow, it will probably come out looking very watery. That is okay. That's sort of normal to be expected. What happens is, as it sits, after it bakes, as it sits, it'll sort of set up a little bit. And of course, you do want it to sort of be pretty loose. You know, you don't want a very dry eggplant parmesan. But don't worry, it will not be watery by the time it is done. All right, so I'm going to finish this off with just a little bit more. Oops, a little bit more fresh tomato. This will also, you know, you don't, instead of using just fresh sort of pureed tomatoes, you know, canned tomatoes or your fresh homemade pureed tomatoes, you can also use a, you know, a sauce, like if you make like a good marinara sauce, or even like you can even do this with a ragu, you know, if you wanted to. But it doesn't just have to be fresh tomatoes like this. In fact, very typically it is made with a sort of slightly more complex sauce than just plain tomatoes. All right, so a layer of tomato. On that last layer, I am careful to sort of coat the eggplant just so it doesn't burn as it bakes. Some dollops of this fresh mozz. Set that. That much is looking good. A little bit for the chef. I am going to put a little bit of basil on. Some people don't like the look or taste of basil baked on top of, you know, pizza, baked on top of their pizza or on top of their casseroles. I like the way kind of wilted basil fragrances the whole thing, and also I don't mind the way it looks on there. So I'm going to add some basil here pre-bake, and then I will also add some post-bake. And finally, I'm going to do some pre-bake Parmesan, and I'll also do some post-bake Parmesan. Little drizzle of the fancier extra version. Oh. And into a 400-degree oven it goes. All right, so that should take, you know, basically I'm looking for it to be really nice and bubbling hot all the way through, and for there to be a good amount of browning on the top. Not, you know, not crazy brown and bubbly, but I want some, you know, some nice spotty browning on that mozzarella. So that should take, because, you know, the eggplant, when they're hot, it cooks faster than, say, something like a lasagna, but it'll still take probably 20 to 30 minutes or so. So I will see you when that's ready in about, all right, 20 minutes or so. And like I said, you can see it looks pretty watery right now, and this is okay. What looks watery now is going to become juicy as this rests. And so what we're gonna do now is wait, you know, like the longest, well, what would be the longest 20 minutes of your, if you've never had longest 20 minutes of your life, unless you've ever had a kidney stone. Anyway, so I'm gonna let this sit here for about 20 minutes, and I will see you back then, all right? So I will see you in 20 minutes or so. All right, so now that water is no longer watery. It's now kind of juicy and saucy and kind of really, really intense in flavor. Oh, you also noticed I didn't salt the eggplant at all. I didn't really salt anything after that initial eggplant, and that's because that, you know, when you salt the eggplant initially to purge it, you're getting plenty of salt in there, so you don't really need any for the rest of the dish. All right, so I'll finish off a little bit of fresh basil, final sprinkle of parm. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a spoon to kind of plate this, and I'll spoon some of those juices out around it as well. Pan juices. It is a taste of summer. I'm gonna give it a little bit of olive oil here on my plate. All right, so we got this creamy eggplant with some crispy bits, gooey cheese. Super bright, fresh tomato sauce. Basil Parmesan. Nothing else, and that's it. Real simple. I almost like it better than the American breaded and fried version. I like them both. All right, guys, gals, non-binary pals. Eggplant parm, fresh, simple tomato sauce. I will see you on the next one. All right, bye-bye.